Welcome to Art with Ian. Today we're talking about environment design. That's coming up next. All right, welcome to episode 4 of the environment design series. Today we are talking about value. So, value. Let's talk a little bit about why value is so important. So, value is how the human eye defines shape and form. Without value, we wouldn't see in 3D. So you can't just take one color without a value attached to it. Chroma doesn't define shape. Like, you can't create shadow and light with just chroma. You need value. Okay, so working in value before color removes the distraction of color, which can mislead our judgment. So when you might think some colors are darker or have a different value attachment than they actually do, and we'll get more into that in the next episode when we talk about color. But colors can be very deceiving. So it's good to understand value first. And working in value is a great way to understand how to get your painting to read without depending on color. And lastly, making sure a painting reads with only values will ensure it reads in color. So check back to your values as you transition into color. And also on the color episode, I'll also show you how to set up a layer that you can just turn on and off, and basically it'll just switch everything back to all grayscale, so you can see how as you go into color you can make sure that you're still adhering to all the values that you established. So that's basically a quick overview of why this is really important. And down the road, as you get better and better at understanding and seeing value within the colors you choose, you can just go straight to color. A lot of times I do just paint straight with color. There are other times, like if I'm doing a particularly difficult composition for a client and I want to make absolutely sure that it's visually communicating properly, I'll start with value still, even after all the years I've been painting in color. So it's definitely important to understand this stuff. So let's jump over. I've got a recording of my painting process, getting my values blocked in. I've sped it up a little bit because I didn't think anyone would really want to watch in real time. So we're going to jump over to that and we'll talk about that process. All right. Okay, so as you can see here at the beginning, I'm just blocking in a bit of my background sky, establishing the value range of the background sky. And for the whole piece, I'm going to be using a value range breakdown, which is basically, I'm not going to be using 0, which is white, and I'm not going to be using 100%, which is black. I'm going to be using basically between 10 and 30% in the background. I'm going to be using between 40 and 70%, or 40 and 60%, excuse me, in the midground, and then between 70 and 90% in the foreground. And basically the reason that I'm going to break it down into a 1, 2, 3 read is because that's going to make sure that each section of the painting stands out, has its own value range, and then that's going to give us the 1, 2, 3 read that helps push the feeling of distance. So if you get a deep value in the background, the eyes are going to immediately tell you it's not far away, because you can't see that much contrast or dark value in the distance due to atmospheric perspective. So another thing to keep in mind is in the foreground, yes, my base is going to be dark, but there will be highlights eventually in a much lighter, higher value range because we see much more contrast close up to us. In the distance, I will keep the values very close together. So not only will they be values around 10, 20, 30, there's not going to be any big jumps to help show shadow and light. All of the shadow and light will be sold within that very small range. Whereas here in the foreground, allow a much wider range of value, but it's still on a base of those darker values to make sure you feel that it's close to you. As you can already see just on that rock in front of the waterfall, that I've got a wider range of values on that rock than probably most places in the painting already. So another thing that I like to do as I build my values is I start with a lower, like if I know something's going to reach around 60% value overall, I don't start there. I always build. I build things up because I want to see where I really want it to be. I don't want to, first of all, assume that I know. And it's much easier to build your values up, but you also get a more organic and layered feeling when you don't just paint one solid color, or in this case, one solid value, all down at once. I'm trying to create the first signs of texture and just organic shapes and forms in life and in this place. So I don't get into a ton of like real nitty gritty detail in this value blocking. I tend to want to keep it. I want to stay away from too much detail when I'm doing this, because really what I want it to be is compositionally sound. That's the most important part. I want it to read. If we zoomed way out to the point where you don't see detail at all, does the composition still read? Can you tell that there's, a big focal point shape, which is our cliffside, and then that there's a foreground element and a background element. That's the composition when you strip it all the way down to the bare bones. So here I've lowered the opacity on my line drawing. It's really good to make sure you try and do this as soon as possible. The reason being that the line drawing will tie things down in a way that really stops you from seeing how well your values are doing the job they should be doing. Because at the end of the day, this line drawing has to go away. It's just going to be a painting. So, and the values are the thing that will differentiate each shape, each form from one another. So the quicker we can get the opacity of that line drawing down, we don't want it off because we still need our roadmap for now, but as we lower that, we get more and more dependent on the value and less dependent on the line art, which is really important. And the sooner you can do that, like I said, the sooner you can do that, the better you'll be. So here I'm also thinking about where my light is. My light is actually over my right hand shoulder behind me and coming down from an angle we talked about, and I believe the last episode we talked about how casting a specific shadow across my main point of interest is going to help bring up the contrast in that area. And so I want the light to be in the sky at an angle where it comes down properly to cast that shadow, but I also want it to be behind me and starting to set so that I can get some mood into the light as well. I don't want, middle of the day light where all the shadows are short and super dark and there's no mood. My sky would be really boring. The whole painting would be quite boring if the lighting was boring. So I don't actually paint a bunch of my lighting in because of the way I work. I like to use multiply to create my shadows over the tops of all my textures. So you'll notice that I do block some basic sense of light just to get the feeling down, but a lot of the real heavy lifting for the shadow work will be done on the color episode. So really, like I said before, really this is keeping it super simple and really loose still, and just trying to make sure that I'm getting all of my composition elements to read properly. You can see that my grid is still up, but I have the opacity of my perspective grid turned down pretty substantially. I can still see it. It's still keeping me on track, but it's not distracting me. And that's basically, you have to choose for yourself, how visible you want it to be. But I do recommend you keep it there because it's really easy to go to the trouble of making a perspective grid and then you turn it off and you just kind of forget, or you get caught up in the painting, and then the next thing you know, you've gone completely off the mark with your perspective. Here I'm just using one of my texture brushes and I'm laying down some grit and tooth, and then I just erase it back. Oh, by the way, all of this is being done basically on 2 different layers. I did that on its own layer so that I can mess with the opacity and erase it back, and then as soon as I finish doing that, I'll merge it down. See, there it's merged down. Now I'm starting another layer and doing a little bit more texture. Here I'm just filling in a selection with textures, and I'm taking that and I'm skewing it. So I'm hitting the distort, transform, distort, and I'm pulling it into perspective. Then doing a little warp to finalize that. And I'm just basically, it's like treating it like a photo texture, but I created it instead of it being a photo. And it's just getting some, some extra tooth down in some of these areas. I believe, yeah, so I get in here and I start to define a little bit more. So I don't just leave it like that. That feels a little contrived, but it's a good, it gets something good to kind of paint over, just like photo textures. It's the same concept, where with a photo texture, you don't want to just put a photograph down, skew it into place or whatever, and walk away. Like, it looks terrible, it looks like a bad Photoshop job, and we're painters, we're not photo collagers. So at least the way I see it, I solve my problems as a painter. The only reason I would use a photo texture or create a texture like I did there is to save time, because I don't want to sit and noodle these tiny little details. I know I could if I wanted to, but I don't want to. I want to get this painting going, so that should be the reason why you use those kinds of things, photo textures or whatever. It's not because you can't paint it, it's because you want to save time. That should always be the reason, and you should always paint over that kind of stuff, and make sure that the painting is the thing that's reading at the end of the day, not a bunch of terrible photo bashing stuff. Okay, so here I'm starting to get in and define just a little bit more of this pathway. So it might not have been obvious to anybody up until now, and hopefully eventually I do get it to read. It'll probably read a lot better in color, to be honest, because I'll be able to use kind of a brownish color for the path itself and then get more rock and foliage around it. But I'm trying to sell this path from somewhere down below, where people who go up here, that like they can actually walk up there and get to the gate. In fact, I might even actually paint some hint of that path into the foreground to show, like, if you go down that way, it all connects, right? I didn't actually do that while I was working on this, but I did think about it afterwards. So here I'm selecting out the edge of my foreground, and I'm just going to grab an airbrush, a little bit of a lighter gray, and I'm just pushing a little atmosphere. This is just a nice, simple way to just separate things out, just right around your foreground elements. It pushes the contrast, and you can see how much it pops those foreground elements. And you always want to be mindful of the separations that you need to create between certain points, of interest, or what's in the foreground, what's in the midground, what's in the background. You want to make sure that doesn't bleed together to such a point that the viewer can't very simply and easily kind of put themselves in certain depth points of your painting. If I'm looking at this painting, I want to feel like I'd have to, like, literally walk a certain distance to get to that gate. I don't want it to feel like there's a rock, there's the gate, and they live on the same plane, like a flat. You don't want things to flatten out. So getting in there with the lasso tool, following the edges of some of your different elements, and just using atmosphere to push things back and around and stuff, that's a really good way to handle that. But you have to be careful. Like anything else, you can overdo it very quickly and it just starts looking like silly. Okay, here I've pulled a symmetry layer. I've created a new layer and turned on vertical symmetry. And now I'm painting, I've turned off everything so I can see what I'm doing. I'm painting a new version of my gate. I want a version of my gate on its own layer. It's like the one thing that I'm separating out from everything else. And I'm looking at what I have there, and I'm also glancing at my references from my reference sheet. I'm trying not to get too, I'm trying to avoid being too familiar with, like, my shape language being too familiar with that stuff, but just a little guidance. And then I'm using the symmetry mode to create this so that I can come up with ideas and without the pressure of repeating them on the other side, you know. So everything that I do gets mirrored, and so that's really nice, a nice way to handle this. The only issue is that by doing this, the perspective is lost. You can see the perspective of my gate in the painting, how it's following that 2-point perspective we created, and this, now that it's, you know, just perfectly straight, you can see the line, how the lines aren't in perspective. So once I finish this, I'm going to have to deal with that. And the way that I deal with that is by turning on the free transform option and distorting it into place. And that again is where the grid comes super handy. Having that grid up, I can just literally line it straight up to my grid. And I'll continue to work this once we go to color. This is still not really the final, but I just wanted to make sure I got something down that I felt like had a pretty decent look. And then when we're in color, it's going to be a little easier to see, like, just little ways to kind of bring it up even that tiny bit more. But I was pretty happy end of the day with it feels like it feels really kind of like a more sophisticated version of the original gate, basically, which is what I wanted. I just wanted, like, I didn't want to lose too much of my ideas and my shape language. I just wanted it to feel slightly more sophisticated. So now I'm going to put it in place here. You can see I've got the transform option up. I'm kind of just lining up the general size first, and now I'm distorting it, and you can see I'm, you know, I've got that straight line across, so you can see I'm kind of looking, how does that work with my perspective grid? And you can see now, if you look at the two grid lines above and below, you can see that my horizontal line is in line with that. Now I'm pushing that third point of perspective in, making it feel like it's actually in camera. Checking it back with my original. And then I'm able to go in there and I think I erase out the sketch. Yeah, I check to see where the sketch is at, and then I erase out the sketch from behind it so I don't lose my line drawing everywhere else. And now I've got my new gate. And that feels, to me, that feels like it doesn't lose the mood that I was going for, but it doesn't look quite as rough. You know, now I'm just kind of redefining my edges once I see it on the rock face itself. I just want it to feel like it's kind of built in there, like, you know, built in, not just slapped on top. And that's another important thing. Anytime you create something like a layer and you put it on your painting, you have to make sure you marry it with your work. It's amazing how easy it is for things to start looking like stickers when you work in layers. So, and even here, without the cast of shadow from the cliff onto it, it still doesn't look super married into the image. But again, like I said, that'll come in the color. Okay, now I'm grabbing some texture brushes, and I've created a layer to do this on a clipping mask, and I'm just pushing some texture on, and then I use my eraser and feather it back. And that's just, you know, getting the first hints that this isn't a brand new super slick thing. Like, it's made of some stone, and it's probably been there a little while. I don't want it to look dilapidated by any stretch. I want this to be a quite grand and upkept location, but just that little bit of it's been there, and there's plant life, and there's water splashing around, and you know, just elements. So getting in there, just defining a little bit, adding a couple little lines that I thought might help. As you can see, I've lined that up to my center. Like, it wasn't quite centered before, now I've got it on my center line. Okay, getting in, we're starting to just get towards the end now. Getting in there and defining a little bit more, like just some of the foliage ideas that I want, to make sure that I don't lose track of those. Like I said, I like to build things up. So I want to make sure that I know where I was saying to myself, hey, this is foliage, not just rock texture, you know, because without color, we need to be really careful that we use the shapes as well as the values to kind of make sure that everything feels like what we want it to be. I'm just defining that there are some windows on this building back there, just a little bit more, trying to make it a little bit more obvious that there's, you know, castle stuff going on up there. A little more definition in the rocks. Now I've got the line drawing completely turned off, checking to see that I've got a read without the line drawing at all. And just, you know, again, using that lasso tool, pushing things back where I say, hey, to myself, hey, is this obvious that this rock is in front of that rock? Not obvious enough? Okay, grab the lasso tool, just give it a quick pass. It only takes a second to do. And if you're not that confident with the lasso tool, this is the best way to get more confident with it, because it's a rock. Like, it doesn't have, like, your lassoing doesn't have to be crazy accurate. Like, the shape of the rock can be slightly redefined by the lasso that you draw. Like, it's a rock, you know what I mean? It's not following the shape of an eyeball or something that if you mess it up even minutely, that your viewer will be like, hey, that's not how eyes look, you know? So this is a perfect place to start practicing some of those skills. Landscapes are, you know, there's a lot of freedom to be had in this kind of painting. So, which is one of the reasons why it's so fun. So now I'm going to get in here and define this waterfall opening kind of area just a little bit. Unfortunately, I do believe as I worked this, I got slightly out of perspective. No, I don't think I did. I think I might have fixed it. Yeah, I fixed it right there. Okay, there it goes. That's where having a grid is so nice, because it would be, for me anyways, it would be literally impossible to know that was slightly out of perspective, but getting it into perspective makes it read so much more realistically. So it's just super worth getting these grids built and keeping them around as we do this phase of the painting. Getting a little, you know, splashing foam established, and I'll be able to use that at my discretion to help separate the foreground and background as well, that foam mist and stuff. So that's going to be great for that. Okay, I've merged down again, so now I'm just going to push a little contrast, just and now I'm checking my values. I'm saying, okay, I'm color picking. Does anything go below 90? No. Does anything go above 30? No. Okay, then I think we can call it good. So that's going to wrap it up for this one. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe, ring the bell for notifications of future videos, comment, and I will see you guys in the next one. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe, share it with your friends, ring the bell for notifications of future videos, and I'll see you guys in the next one.